Good morning and welcome to SnapTech IT's monthly webinar. My name is Ted Hulsey. I'm Chief Revenue Officer for SnapTech IT and your host for today's event. Thanks for joining in for the live session. This webinar will be recorded and circulated to all registrants. You can also find it on our YouTube channel. The topic for today is 7 ways to better manage your outsourced IT service provider. Today, I'm joined by SnapTech co-founder and CEO, Carl Bickmore. Carl, welcome to the webinar.
Thanks, Ted. Glad to be here.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining in the live session. Do encourage you to ask questions as we go along. We'll try to address your questions on the fly, and we also have a formal Q&A section at the end of today's webinar. Let's have a quick peek at the agenda. We always take 1 or 2 minutes just to introduce a little bit about SnapTech if we've got anybody who's potentially a prospective client and wants to know a little bit more about us. So we just spend a couple minutes on that. And then we'll get into the meat of the conversation. Today's going to be very interactive and very much a dialogue where I'm going to be interviewing Carl. Carl's been doing this for well over 20 years, has tons of experience in working directly with clients, leading them on their IT journeys. And we'll talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, I think, really, of what, where organizations can struggle if you don't have, I think everybody's got to invest in a really good outsourced relationship. I think that's a key theme. But we're going to get down to really what can you and your organization do to best maximize the value you get out of your outsourced IT service relationship. And Carl will share his firsthand experience with doing this for a very long time. We'll have a formal Q&A section at the end. A little bit about SnapTech IT. We are a security-first managed service provider with offices in Atlanta, Georgia, Phoenix, Arizona, and San Francisco, California. The bulk of our clients, you find them in those 3 states, but we really can serve clients all over the United States. We really engage with our clients in 2 different ways. For companies that usually have somewhere between 20 to 100 employees, we deliver what we call managed IT, where we really do everything that's IT and technology related on behalf of the client. And in those cases, most of the organizations will not have anybody on staff who has IT on their badge, if you will. And then for larger organizations, say that are in the kind of the 1 to 500 employee range, we deliver what's called co-managed IT, where there's usually an IT team or a director of IT or an IT manager at the organization, and they're really turning to us for specialized expertise or more capacity in the IT function as they grow. So those are the 2 ways we engage with and service clients. Let's kind of get into today's conversation. And really the way we've organized the content is we have really 7 best practices. And we're going to talk about what we see in the marketplace today in terms of, when we bring on a new client, very often the client will have been leaving a prior service provider relationship. And we hear a lot about what didn't go right in those relationships. And we'll share, and we have a lot of relationships with other MSPs. We're very plugged into the industry, and we're always listening and learning and trying to do what we do better. And so we'll talk about where are some rough spots, and then what do we recommend you do with your provider, and what does SnapTech really believe is the best practice from our side as well. So Carl, let's start things out and talk about QBRs and what are some of the things we see where maybe organizations don't engage with their outsourced provider enough, and what happens in those situations, and what are the business impacts, and then how do we do it?
Awesome. Well, thanks, Ted. Since you made me sound like an old man grandpa, for a minute here, been doing this since the beginning of time. Real quick, just to set the stage for myself a little bit too, because you do a great job. I'd like to answer that QBR question, but real quick, I kind of want to back up 1 step higher if I can, which is to say, one is we in our QBR, in our monthly webinar practice, make a big point of inviting our existing customers to our webinars. And then if there are folks that are prospects that are interested, that's great too. So that gives them an insight to how we operate. Maybe that makes them want to engage. But this is a really good topic because it also speaks to just generally how we want to partner. And I think that's the big key difference is we're looking for companies looking to behave as a partner and for us to behave like a partner, or like we're your internal IT department. Like you might work with coworkers, not always in the same way that you might handle a traditional vendor relationship, where it might be a different type of relationship than more the partnership style. And so I think a lot of our point of views on these things comes from the fact that, hey, your provider needs to step up and be willing to do things, but also, you need to be interested in this too. I also have another really big philosophical thing to share that I think is really important. I think that we have lots of amazing customers, many of which I know signed up for this webinar. Hi, good to see you. The many of them I would consider my friends because I know them and I've known them for a while. But as we have this IT going out there, I think it's just important to note that not all IT companies operate this way, and not all customers are interested in this level of engagement. And so that could be an interesting question, because it could be one of the reasons that you're struggling with your current vendor, whoever they are, us or somebody else, is because you're like, I just want to say do it and it's all done and never be involved. But I've also found along the way philosophically that our customers are really good at what they do in their business. Maybe they're good financial managers, maybe they're good at running whatever manufacturing facility or whatever retail location they do, or whatever defense industrial base contract subcontractor thing that they do. But fundamentally, oftentimes, especially in the smaller businesses, that they are not specifically IT experts, and so that's one of the reasons why they have us there. But I've also found to know how to manage IT. And so I think the biggest thing is, as long as your IT company is willing to be transparent and share with you and be willing to say, okay, we could do that better, or this is a better way we can work together, that's going to work. And so I think one of the biggest things we can do is this very first best practice, number one, which is embracing quarterly business reviews. Now, some of our clients, just on the way that it works, we might do them a little more often than quarterly, and some we might do them just twice a year, because that business just doesn't have that many changes. But in general, I found that it's human nature that about every 90 days or so, we can be getting off track on what's going on. And rather than let a problem or a miscommunication fester and become worse and more dissatisfied, it's better that we get together and we give each other the feedback. And that way we're having a consistent flow, and we can always make sure we're aligned. Just like in your own company, you need your employees to be aligned with your own goals, your own priorities, your own way of behaving. So does your IT provider need to do that. They need to want to. They need to have the discipline to show up and show you the reporting, to show you what's really going on, and then to take your feedback and then ask themselves how they can do better, or what they can continue, or how they can better prepare you for the future. And so I think the issues are really key. Is like, a lot of times, if you don't have a practice of doing this regular QBR meeting routine, then what happens is you only have meetings when you have a problem. And a lot of times it could have easily been stopped or made not as worse had there just been a regular cadence that you met on. The other key thing is look, if your IT provider is not willing to be transparent and give you the report that says, look, that didn't go well, look, we had a whole bunch of issues of this kind, or hey, this is a pattern. If they're not willing to show you where the IT problems are, or where they're struggling, or where there might be issues, then or noting when it's going well, right? If they're not willing to do that, I think that's a real issue. But as a business owner, you need to be willing to come to the table to ask that as well. To be engaged enough to ask the questions. You don't need to know IT, but you need to be able to share what you're concerned about in your business and what is and isn't working well. And that's the other thing, is the strategic alignment. IT done properly is going to be planned out years in advance to avoid surprises, to make the budgeting easier. And having a regular cadence for doing that and showing that planning is definitely the way to go forward, so that there's no surprises and everybody stays aligned. I don't know if there's much more to say about that practice. We know a lot of our competitors do these. We know a lot say they do and then never do. And I'll be honest, I think we have some customers that sometimes, like, they're not sure they're getting the value out of it that they want, or they just, let's put off that meeting this time. And I think that sometimes that's just a place where we can just get more disconnected or more drifting apart on alignment between what you're looking for and what we're doing. And so, they don't have to take, many hours, and they don't have to do everything under the sun and be a big complicated meeting, but a regular checkpoint between, the people that are decisions makers of the clients and the folks at the IT provider is a really good decision to make to embrace that partnership, if you will.
Yeah, and I would just say that, a couple comments. There is kind of a running gag in the MSP industry that, a lot of MSPs say they do regular strategic meetings, but they don't call them QBRs. They because they can't call them QBRs because they're actually not happening quarterly. So, that's that's a disappointing thing, but it's kind of a red flag that if you don't have a regular cadence with your provider, that's probably an issue that either side needs to work on, or maybe both. But I think, sometimes we do see the temptation creep in, even with our own clients, that to procrastinate a little bit. Maybe, hey, let's punt this quarter and get to it next quarter. And we just would encourage everybody that having a cadence and a discipline, just like with any meeting cadence inside of an organization, having a cadence and a discipline is so powerful. Not every meeting's going to be perfect. Not every meeting's going to be a 9 or a 10. But if you keep the discipline, that even when you have a meeting that maybe you're maybe a little frazzled or too busy that week or whatever, keeping the discipline is so valuable, because you don't put off those important conversations. You don't put off the opportunities to have a candid conversation with somebody about something that needs to get better. You don't miss those conversations about how to make something better. And you don't have that drift you were talking about, Carl, with losing that focus on the strategic alignment. So keep after it, I think is the key.
If you're one of our customers, thank you for meeting with us. And if we're getting a little behind, maybe we can both redouble our efforts to make sure that we're staying in contact that way. And then if you're working with somebody else and they don't have this practice, perhaps ask them if they'd be willing.
Yeah. And I would say the other thing to talk about is I think the next topic we're going to talk about is account management. Make the meeting also your own. Come with your own agenda topics. Be willing to share with your IT provider the strategic issues your organization is struggling with around growth or cost cutting or, employee productivity or whatever, because there are so many ways technology can be leveraged to help you in your business challenges. And we, as your provider, we have a ton of technical expertise, but we can't necessarily read your mind about what the business issues are that are keeping you awake at night. So the other thing to do is to really come to these meetings with your own agenda topics and ideas that you would like our feedback and input on. We're not going to be able to solve them in the meeting necessarily, but we're going to be able to take really good notes, come back, bring the right people to the table in a follow-up meeting to get after some of these issues, because technology can usually be a big enabler to help you solve some of these business challenges.
Yeah, it's so true. Just simply put, when you bring your own issues to the table or have your own and you're sharing with us about your strategy, we're just better able to make recommendations.
That's right. So let's go to the next topic, which is leverage your account manager and VCIO. So what are some challenges we see in the industry, and then what do we recommend?
Yeah, look, every IT, there's no regulation out there that says, okay, now you're a good qualified IT company and you do great work. Anybody can say I'm an IT company, regardless of skill set or ability or how they sell or operate their business. So given that there's no specific thing that certifies you a great IT company or whatever, or just because the business owner of that IT company just wants to do it differently, everybody can take a different approach. So not everybody's going to have somebody in their IT company called an account manager or a virtual CIO. And regardless of whether they have that title or not, I think the key thing is if they have these dedicated roles, they're there for a reason. So I like the best practices, leveraging them. When there are people that are dedicated to things like our account managers and our VCIOs are, you can leverage them to get over some of the frustration or some of the things that might be, getting clunky with your IT provider. So for instance, when nobody is dedicated, for instance, to customer service or the QBR process, like our account managers are, they tend to have lots of jobs, and handling customer service is just one of them, right? Or maybe nobody specifically has it assigned. But when there is somebody there for that, and there's somebody there to be a high-level technical resource like our VCIOs are, they both can be leveraged for various reasons. And I think the key things is these become an additional direct resource for the primary people in your organization to be able to say, hey, I see this going on, or I see this pattern, or I've got this hot issue and I'm not sure the team just recognized how hot it is or how it should be prioritized. At least for us, and we're not the only ones that have these kind of roles, but there are plenty of IT providers that don't. So I'd say, one, they need to have these kind of roles in their business. But secondarily, how you can leverage them can really make a difference in your experience, because these are folks that are dedicated to your account that you should have a personal relationship with, that you should be able to reach out to directly and say, hey, this is going on, or I need help with this, or please, can we get this resolved? And then they can go to our internal team and make things move that may be stuck or maybe didn't understand the prioritization. Every IT provider is going to have some type of like help desk or someplace you call or tickets come into, and those folks, that's their job. They sit there and react all day. It's kind of a tough job, and sometimes they're going to make mistakes, or they're going to be slow to get to something. And having a clear escalation path like an account manager or a VCIO to reach out to help you through that process, if we haven't really identified something correctly, we appreciate the help. And I think it's a good pro tip, if you will, or best practice to be able to do that. And I think the other key thing is these are people that become dedicated to your account, and so you should be able to develop a real relationship with them, get to know them, to trust them, to be able to catch their attention quickly, and they can tell you and warn you of something, or they can be looking out for you if they understand you and your business better. So we really encourage these roles to make personal relationships with our contacts at our customers as much as possible, so that we're more likely to make the right judgment call. And so these are just common things that come up out there, is that you need that extra person to reach out to, or that extra resource. And that's what account managers and VCIOs are for. And so if you're not leveraging them, or you're not reaching out to them, or using them to help in these ways, we highly recommend it. We think your experience will be improved by it.
And Carl, maybe double click a little bit on the specific mission of the VCIO.
Look, the VCIO is, think of it like, so we call it virtual CIO, or it's like, we used to call this role IT manager back in the day, but the idea is that this is a person that thinks strategically and at high level. They manage documentation, they clear through change control, which we're going to talk about in a minute. They are also the primary people to make future recommendations and set up the plan of the IT, which we'll call an IT roadmap. And they're the ones that become a very high-end technical escalation resource as well. And so the VCIO roles, those really are our highest level technical people, and we leverage them to help make sure that the rest of the team is successful, trained, knows how to do the things in your environment well, and they can jump in a pinch when there's something very tricky going down, or if there's some complicated issue that's arisen.
Okay, super. All right, so let's go to best practice number 3 and talk about change control or change management.
Yeah. Well, okay, so this is an interesting one. Look, it's something that we really try to talk, particularly when we're talking to a new customer coming on board. We try to explain this process, and some embrace it right away, some aren't sure, they're not used to it. It's a very interesting thing to me, because it just at the high level, logical, it just makes sense that change control is enacted. There's security reasons for it, and then there's just reliability and performance reasons for it. The key thing is I think I got this from my old buddy Robert Lindley, who I haven't talked to in a few years because he's since sold and retired his IT company. He used to say the 3 villains of IT are cowboys, pirates, and ninjas. And cowboys shoot from the hip. They just get a request and do something, and they don't make sure that you actually want to do, or make sure it's planned well. And so the pirates, they hide the information, so they'll know stuff in their head and not share it with others. And the ninjas come and go without telling anybody, right? But the cowboys is specifically what the change control is about. Is we don't need IT cowboys out there. Why is that? Well, if anybody could call up and say that they're from your company and they need access to this HR folder or this accounting resource, or they need to set up a new user account. If we didn't stop and say, hey, why don't we verify that request actually came from the company before we actually enact it? And that's called change control. We don't make a change without validation, verification, and planning. It's funny because this is a well-known IT best practice, but I will say fully rarely done out there in the managed IT world for small business, which I find amazing. I just don't even know what to say about it. But I do know that can mean sometimes something's going to take longer to do, because if a request comes in and say, hey, I need this application installed. Great. We're first going to verify it really came from you, because people can fake emails when they're getting into it to try to attack or get access to something. Or it might just be that user really shouldn't have access to that application. So we always check with who is our change approver at the customer, say, is so-and-so approved for this application? And if so, then great, then we proceed. But that process of us reviewing it, creating the plan, verifying it, and then asking somebody in your organization to verify that this is a correct action does take an extra step and extra time. So what is the value? That means that getting it resolved will take a little longer. However, it also means we're not rushing to decision. We're not implementing change without thinking through the best we can. And so that's change control, and it does add to the time it takes to do it, but it also adds to assurance and reliability, performance, and security, right? And so it's an interesting thing, because many businesses aren't used to it, and we find ourselves with new customers oftentimes needing to remind them the value of this, because they're like, oh, why don't we just get this done? So and so asked for it. Like, well, we want to make sure it really came from them, and that you really want them to have that. It could mean a spend. It could mean that they're asking for something that's not part of their job. I don't know. We just verify,
right.
If that makes sense.
And one of the biggest dangers is that the cyber criminals out there know that this is kind of an Achilles heel in a lot of organizations, and an Achilles heel in terms of how a lot of people relate to IT. We all are leveraging technology, not necessarily because we love it, and a lot of people don't love it. We do it because we have to get work done, and we need to be productive, and we need to serve our customers. And often there's emergencies, and often there's a sense of urgency, and people are running with scissors, or they're being the cowboy. And the cyber criminals try to exploit that sense of urgency and get people to approve things, and they call in and try to social engineer. They pretend like they're an employee. And that is a major, major risk in IT today. And the main way the cyber criminals get access to systems is social engineering. They're not hacking away. They are exploiting people's bad habits or our desire to like rush through and get things done. And this process is just says, wait, stop, slow down for one moment. Let's check and verify. And I think the art of this whole thing is your provider does need to have the software systems and workflow and expertise at doing this efficiently. And that's something that we spend an awful lot of time investing in and working on, is having the software tools that allow us to very quickly communicate with the right people, get things approved, and then get the change implemented once it is approved.
Yeah, and just as a side tip, even outside the realm of IT, having like a secondary verification on sensitive things, like if somebody sends an email saying they want to change their direct deposit, and I might want to double check in person if that's for real, or other things like wire transfer instructions. Like you just got to verify these security things. You simply can't take an email that says it's from somebody as real, no matter how much it looks like it really came from their account. And in fact, even if it's a hacker, it might have still come from their actual account. And so you just got to be careful. It's good to implement change control around anything sensitive for sure, regardless of an IT issue, just any process in your organization that's sensitive.
That's right. All right, let's go to best practice number 4. Let's talk about the benefits of budgeting and planning.
Yeah, and this is always a tricky one because there's things you can predict and things you can't predict. And the more you get involved in having things set up, stabilized, and functioning, then the better you can get at predicting. And so it's, when we're first onboarding customers, there's a lot more things that are unpredictable at the beginning. Once we settle in, we find ourselves getting to a spot where we can predict much better and more accurately. And then you really get into a zone where there just shouldn't be IT surprises. There shouldn't be IT cost surprises. You should know a couple years out generally when things are going to need to be cycled, when things are going to be expected to be done, and be able to budget for that. And so that the whole thing is, it's like, if your current provider is not doing a great job of this, or you'd like us to do a better job of it, or I know that we endeavor to do this in all of our QBR meetings. Some customers embrace it more than others, but I would say that the more that you can kind of be aware of a couple years in advance of what's going down, the less surprised you'll be, and the more you'll be able to plan for it. I think always the biggest trick for us on this is getting somebody into the routine zone. When we first bring them on, they may not have had a good budgeting practice, and it takes a while to clear through the technical debt that has been built up of very old computers or old systems. And you have to make the changes in the most practical way possible. But I think it's always fair to say planning is better than just reacting, especially when it comes to financial things. And so that's the idea. And so if your current provider is not doing this, we recommend it. And maybe for our existing customers, if it's not really helping you, maybe we can have a good discussion about how that budgeting process can be more effective for you. I know we're always providing reporting of age of computers, and so that people can know when that asset's coming up. But there are other things to plan for as well: servers, firewall switches, backup solutions, cloud migrations that may need to happen, major application changes. Those are all things that would be good to know and have a plan for when it's happening, so it's not done under duress because it's just an immediate reaction, or we let it go so far that it becomes a very complicated problem.
Yeah, and I guess the two other things to plan for or plan around are the cybersecurity landscape is always evolving. And so a huge part of our QBR conversations and ongoing dialogue with clients is about the threat ecosystem, new technologies that are coming into their own that we really highly recommend that can get after problems. And I think everybody struggles with budgets, right? I mean, we are sensitive to that. Whether you're a new client or you're an existing client, we get it. There's finite resources, and we have to prioritize, and we have to approach things from a business perspective. It's got to be a risk management conversation. It's got to align with your budgets. It's got to have an ROI by making your organization either more agile or more productive. So we understand these realities, but one big thing that you always have to keep in mind is that the cyber criminals continue to innovate. And the good news is that the cybersecurity industry continues to innovate. So there's a steady stream of interesting technologies that we keep an eye on that we'll be bringing to you and talk to you about how they can potentially help us stay ahead.
Yeah, and there's no doubt. I've been in many meetings with customers like, well, do we ever get there? Are we ever at the end? Unfortunately, with cybersecurity, I don't think so, which is unfortunate. I mean, there's always something more to consider or do. And so it always does come down to a risk conversation of saying, well, how much risk do you want to take? I think that business owners should generally always be worried about two things: is they're making their money, their profit side, and then the risk, which is protecting it, right? Protecting from liability, protecting from some, ransomware event or those kind of things. And the unfortunate thing is, it's like, look, there's lots of ways that approach this differently. I think that some folks are out there just to try to sell you another thing. I could tell you, we'll never recommend something if we wouldn't buy it ourselves, and probably already do, because part of our process is to test these things before we recommend them to make sure they're effective and worth it and the best choice. We're not trying to increase more things that we can sell you. We're trying to protect you. And I think that goes into another best practice coming up as well. But if you can't get it done now, maybe you can budget for it in the future, and that makes sense. Or maybe you just have to say, hey, we accept this risk, and just know what that means. I think that's always your decision, but you should at least be informed and aware, and having it on a plan can really help getting there.
Yeah, and I would say the other thing that will feed into budgeting and planning is your compliance requirements. We work with a lot of clients that are either in the defense industrial base or they're in the financial services sector, and there's different, and almost every industry either has some laws or federal laws in some cases or industry regulations that are forcing change, really, and forcing organizations to confront kind of traditional immaturity around cybersecurity, for example, and people really need to raise the bar. And those things can be expensive. They're expensive, but they're burdensome if you don't plan ahead. If you get after the compliance realities and think through, well, how are we going to get there? How are we going to go from point A to point B? Then they're not so burdensome because we can really help with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key thing to remember is we're really trying to do two things in the planning. Well, beyond that, we're trying to spread out and plan for the cost. We're trying to encourage fixing problems before they happen. So if a computer's more than 5 years old, the statistics on failure or just performance degradation on that system is incredibly high. That gets to a very high risk situation. So is it that we want to sell a new computer? No, it's that we don't want to have that computer crash and then have to scramble and figure out how to find a replacement one and then get that user up and running and have all that downtime due to that. We want to prevent that, do it in a planned time at a time when that machine has reached its useful life cycle. It makes sense to invest proactively or preventatively. Same thing on the cyber side. As much as I know some of these things can be difficult, I can tell you I've never been in a meeting with somebody that has had some type of hack or ransomware event that doesn't regret and wish they had done more or listened more. Oftentimes it's something that was a recommendation that just wasn't done, and it's why it happened.
Yeah, that's a good segue, I would say, to best practice number 5, which is lean in on cybersecurity. Talk to us about that.
I mean, it's a crazy thing these days because the IT world's kind of in a funny place where suddenly IT providers are like cyber this and cyber that. And I think there is a lot of folks out there that are just simply trying to increase wallet share and find ways to share to get a customer to spend more. I can tell you that I couldn't look people in the face and do that. I just don't think that that's right. But it doesn't mean that you can just say no to everything and expect to have a low risk situation. The fact of the matter is that probably everybody listening to this webinar has either been hacked or knows somebody that's been hacked, knows of major issues, knows of people that have had all sorts of problems related to cybersecurity. It is ubiquitous. It is everywhere, and it's not going away. And that means we have to do new things to meet the new issues, right? Like you said, 10 years ago, we used to, maybe 15 years, some customers have been around that long with me. Hi, if you're there. That back then, a good backup, a decent firewall, a good antivirus, and we mostly solved the problem. It's not like that anymore. We have to have detection capabilities. We have to be protecting cloud-based resources. We need to do additional or different backups things to make things work and be protected against the way, because the attackers are constantly figuring out ways around this. We have to continually either introduce new or change things. And so leaning into cybersecurity is like, it's one of the best places you can spend money to prevent an issue. It's one of your best ways to reduce risk in IT, which for many business is when IT is not working can be a big stopper of all business. In fact, I would say most businesses these days don't get along well without their computers functioning or the information for their clients available. And so it's just something that I just think is the reality we have to all embrace, and we have to understand that that's going to be constant things that need to be looked at and done, and a regular review of risk and a regular review of what cybersecurity things are available is important.
Yeah, and we acknowledge that there is a reality of budget fatigue. I mean, as Carl, as you said, the clients have asked us, when will we reach nirvana? When we reach the promised land where we don't have to continue to raise the cybersecurity budget. It's not looking good about like ever arriving there at a place where you can be complacent about this. So we do appreciate the budget fatigue issue, but kicking the can down the road or sticking your head in the sand. It doesn't work. And that's why the whole process of embracing planning as a discipline and regular meetings with your VCIO and account manager are so vital, because you can have the conversations, you can make it a risk management conversation, and you can really get at the heart of, okay, well, what does this help? What risks does this help us mitigate? What will it cost? And then let's look at it rationally about the investment. And then, maybe that investment needs to be made 2 quarters out, put it on the roadmap, but have those conversations. And our job is to translate the technical gobbledygook into a business conversation and a risk management conversation, so that we can make good business decisions about where to go in the future.
Well, look, we want to do it collaboratively. I mean, we want to know where your risk tolerance is and what would be important and what could be delayed, if that makes sense. And simply everybody can only do their best. And so that's our effort, if that makes sense,
Yeah. All right, let's go to best practice number 6, which we called here, test everything.
Yeah. Maybe another way to say this is trust and verify, if you will. How many times do we go in to assess a new organization and find that the server isn't the age they thought it was? I mean, we've had that a few times recently, which is just shocking, that they've been kind of just, frankly, not told the correct information. And I don't know how or why always, but it's just interesting. And verify, validate that backups are actually occurring. I would say easily 9 times out of 10, when we look at a customer's backup that's not our customer yet, but we're evaluating or assessing in some way, their backup does not function the way that the customer thinks it does. And many times it's not working at all, which is shocking, but it is very easy to happen if there is no oversight, management, ongoing review, or monitoring of it. Because I don't know of any backup solution that you just buy, install, and then it just works endlessly without ever needing to be looked at again. And the last time you want to be testing if your backup restore will work is when you need it. You should have hopefully already had confidence it's going to work and work correctly. And so these are just great examples of, like, how do you know your firewall's set up correctly? Well, are you getting a report, or do you have a review that shows what's going on, what that looks like? Are there vulnerability assessments being run? They're relatively easy and inexpensive to be done. All of our customers, it's just included in our service that we run these reports, and we're looking at them all the time. The managing of security and backups is something that you absolutely need to hold your partner to, and you need to be validating, asking for the reports, and have assurances that it's working correctly. Just note, it's a very high percentage of folks we find out there that their backup's not working as intended. And I can say proudly, it's something we very much focus on and make sure that we can always catch your data if needed. And if there's a problem, we'll know about it because of the way that we do the monitoring. It's a very big focus, and I think it's a core thing that your IT provider has to do, that frankly, as an owner, you need to make sure that your provider is testing, that they're going through it, and you need to see validation that the monitoring is actually working.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is kind of like we touched on. We have a lot of, we serve clients who are small businesses or growing businesses all the way up to what would be kind of considered medium-sized businesses. And often, either because of a compliance mandate or the sophistication or maturity level a company's operating at, there are often additional measures which should be taken to validate not just that the cybersecurity tools and the backups are working as planned, but that the processes are there, that the that you have policies and procedures and how you respond to things. So we will often get involved around doing pen testing, which is penetration testing in environments, or coordinating and leading tabletop exercises where you simulate a real disaster and you see how effective everybody is at actually responding. So that's kind of a higher level of testing and validation of where you are.
Right. Well, just trust and verify is a great way to, I think of it, which is you should want to make sure and have a way of validating and verifying that your IT provider is delivering this service as promised, as they're billing you for.
Okay, and then before we transition to the last best practice, I want to remind everybody, please share your questions. If you got any burning questions, we'll be moving into formal Q&A mode here in a couple minutes. You know, what are you losing sleep over? What are you struggling with? What do you wish was better in your relationships, your IT service provider outsourced relationships? You know, give us your questions. Let's go to number 7. Which is insist on US-based internal resources. Talk to us a little bit about kind of what's happening in the market out there, Carl, and some challenges and some of the realities.
It's interesting because there is a trend, and I think at many levels there's nothing formally wrong with having like parts of your business outsourced. Certainly that's what we are for our customers. I think that can be a real challenge from time to time when you hire an IT company to find out that some of their internal core services they deliver, they outsource yet another level. And I think that's probably another way of just saying what we're trying to say here is, do they have their own help desk, or are they running somebody else's help desk and selling it to you? What is the effect of that when there isn't that personal direct, and what additional complexity gets into it? Offshoring to other locations has other complications that can become an issue culturally or with preciseness. And I've simply found that, you know, regardless of the location, although for us, because many of our customers are required to have only U.S. citizens for a governmental security reason, you know, whenever I'm working with somebody, they are our own employee. We do not outsource the core functions that we do, if that makes sense. And so there's privacy data issues, there can be compliancy issues, and I know that it's become very popular. And I think it's fine for many things in many parts of any business, but when it comes to your IT provider, do they really have control over their own service that they're offering? Do they really have control of the person that's delivering it? And do they have them meet the standards? And is the security of connection to that person really good? A lot of people fail to realize that one of the very common ways that companies actually get hacked is their IT service provider gets hacked because their own internal security practices are poor. They open up things widely, they let folks in the door, and then once they get into the IT provider's tool set, their entire customer base is easily gotten to. There's been a few times we've been called in on risk assessments from insurance providers post-hack, and the hack was to the IT service provider because we have this particular expertise in the tool set. And so they ask us to come in and help them figure out what happened and help them, the IT provider and all their customers recover. And without a doubt, it comes down to very simple, basic things the IT provider wasn't doing, but there is definitely a big risk when they're outsourcing parts of their own internal core components. That doesn't mean the IT provider can't outsource some things of their business. I just keep saying their core things they offer you, are they their own employees, and are they really delivering it?
Yeah, and it comes back to trust but verify. You know, what we were talking about before. I mean, just like you need to test the backups and the security, and you need to verify in detail with your provider how they're actually delivering the service. And if you are in a very unregulated industry or of a certain size, you know, maybe they're like a provider that is, you know, more creatively combining different offshoring resources might be what works for you. But verify everything and get to the heart of it and know what's required for your particular industry, especially from a compliance perspective.
Like, you know, if they're shady about it or want to represent their own employees, that's one thing. If they're open about it and you find that acceptable, you know, maybe that would work for your organization. But we find that a lot of folks are like, how can I white label these folks? How can I represent them as my employees, but actually be outsourcing that part of it? I've never been a fan of pretending like what we sell is our own offering, but there are many that do. They say, this is our amazing backup service, this is our amazing cloud, and they're really reselling somebody else's, calling it their own. And I feel like they're just fundamentally philosophically that it just doesn't sit well with me. I want to be more transparent. I want to say what we're doing, and if it's okay to everybody involved how we're doing it, then so be it. But I just think that you'll do well to make sure that the core functions are actually handled by internal employees.
Right. And then there's the issue of sometimes the disconnects between what people say they're going to do from a process perspective and the reality. Can you talk to us a little bit about what SOC 2 or SOC 2 Type 2 means, and why are we SOC 2 compliant?
Yeah, there's no requirement for us to get a third party to come in here and audit us. But we've long time felt that is a great way for us to be able to give our customers assurances. For most IT companies, when I say most, I mean an extremely high percentage, there is no third party audit. And so when they say they're good at security and they do their things and they follow up on these things, you just have to take their word for it. Maybe they're trustworthy and they're going to say it correctly. I'm sure many do. There are probably some that aspire to be as such, but maybe aren't quite as much. After all, we're all small businesses trying to make our way through, right? When we have a third-party assessor, this is a formal industry-known standard. These auditors have a financial incentive to only say what is true, and they operate by a standard. And they audit many types of businesses, including IT. So one of our notions is, in the spirit of transparency, is we have an auditor come once a year. In fact, I had an auditor here this morning for our annual review in our Arizona office, and they're going to be in our Georgia office later this week as we're working on our audit with them. There's lots of things they ask for. They validate that we're following our security practices, that we're delivering our services, and we're doing it in a secure way. So you don't have to take our word for it alone. You can go to a reliable source that's fiduciary, responsible for only telling the truth, and see that we are SOC 2 Type 2 compliant. And although we don't broadcast it to the world because it's just not a thing that you do, any of our customers, if they'd like to see our SOC 2 report, that may ask for it. Many do, and many don't. But if you're interested, you can. And if there's a finding or something we need to improve upon, it will be noted there. So you'll know exactly where we did or didn't do well on that SOC report when we were audited.
Okay. All right. Well, those are the 7 best practices on how to work with your IT service provider. A final call for questions for Carl or me. But maybe just, Carl, I think we talked about, today, I think we wanted to say, okay, well, what's happening in the industry? What do we see organizations struggle with? Often when they're new to us, and we get a detailed understanding of the struggles they had with their prior provider. What are the best practices people should implement to have a great outcome, a win-win business outcome with your provider? And then a little bit about how we do things. But maybe for anyone who's really new to us, maybe talk to us about the SnapTech way or our proven process.
Yeah, well, I think one of the key differentiators on how we approach is that first part, that discovery risk assessment when we very first engage. I think that there's 2 sides to this. One is, I think it's arrogant for me to go into a company and not really look around and not really dig in and tell them all the ways that their IT should be operating and all the things that they should do. I can say things that are general best practices or common ways to solve problems, but until we actually know what you have and see where you're going, I think it's arrogant and also rife with potential mistakes or misunderstandings. And so we're very disciplined about not engaging a new customer unless there's an assessment process where we, as thoroughly as possible, go through everything to know where you really sit from a risk standpoint and how your IT assets are, where they are, and what's on them. And so, anytime you're looking for a new provider, if they lack a robust risk assessment process, I think that's a big red flag because they're trying to get you on board without really knowing you, right? And I would also argue it's like there's a really big difference between what some people call their IT risk assessment and what others do. If it's not thorough, if it doesn't involve high-level engineers, like if it's a salesperson running a scan of something, that's not an assessment, that's an attempt to sell you something, right? And so it should be a formal engagement. It should be robust and provide reporting, and should be explained to you in business terms that you can easily understand the risk and make decisions off of. And it should include thorough recommendations as well. So that's where we begin. And then with our customers on an ongoing basis, we quarterly during our QBR process reassess our set of questions to say where the customer's at, and it's how we drive our recommendations is based on these questions that we review. Then moving into a formal onboarding process, some providers have a good formal onboarding process, some do not. I find that anytime if like we're trying to take on a customer in an emergency and we don't get to do the full onboarding process, we end up having to do it in bits and pieces later, and it takes a lot longer and it's not a good experience. So the more we can go from assessment direct to a formal onboarding process, then to ongoing support, then to projects, so forth, so on, and to ongoing management, the better. And so I think those are the two things to highlight is when you're looking at an IT provider, do they have dedicated support people and a separate set of people dedicated to projects? Because if the same people doing both, the one will suffer at the hands of the others. And do they have dedicated people to make sure QBRs are happening and roadmaps are being built and the compliance is reviewed? That's just some of the high level things to look for. Regardless of whoever your provider is, do they have all these motions in place?
Okay. All right. Let's see here. I am not seeing any additional questions. So
We've been too good.
that just means we answered everyone's questions, maybe. Hopefully that means we've at least touched on some of the big topics you guys wanted to hear when you joined us today live. What I want to do real quick, just before we send everybody on to the rest of your day, highlight the fact that we're hosting a webinar next month. Our monthly webinar next month is Ask a Hacker How New AI Tools Are Making Hackers Ever More Dangerous. Very similar to some of the topics we talked about today, that you know, there's continuous innovation out there with the cyber criminals, and they are finding ways to leverage all of these tools to, you know, keep life interesting, unfortunately, you know. But we'll be doing that on November 16th.
It should be a fascinating webinar. And remember, our intention is to make these valuable for our existing customers, of which, like I said, many I know are on our call today. So thank you. Good to see you. And thank you for your business and for the trust you provide in us. And may we ever work to make sure that's well earned and to do our best. And if any folks are here that are, you know, considering us or just looking into us, feel free to reach out.
Yeah, and I think you know, keep us honest too. I mean, I think we're always endeavoring to, you know, raise the bar on ourselves and stay true to our word. And if there was something here that was like, oh, that's news to me, we should really be focusing more on that. Let's have a conversation with your account manager and your VCIO and make sure that we address those concerns and get after them. And if you are a prospective client and thinking about, you know, maybe making a change to a different provider, you know, I would be a good person to reach out to directly coming out of today's webinar to talk about what our IT discovery and cyber risk assessment process looks like at a deeper level, and be happy to do that. So with that, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. If you like today's content, you'll see it on YouTube within a day or two, and feel free to share it with a colleague. And we appreciate you all joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on next month's next webinar. Take care, everybody. See you now.